Good evening, everyone. My name is E.R. Anderson. I'm the executive director of Karis Circle. Karis Circle is the nonprofit programming arm of Karis Books, and Karis Books is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. We're really excited to be here with all of you to celebrate launch week of What Will People Say? Navigating Mental Health, Identity, Love, and Family Between Cultures. We're here with the author, Sahaj Kaur Kohli, in conversation with Dr. Marielle Bouquet. We have had the pleasure of talking with both of you before, but we're really, really always excited to get to help birth a book into the world, celebrate its birth in the world. Tonight's event is co-sponsored by Raksha Inc. Raksha's mission is to promote a stronger and healthier South Asian community through confidential support services, education, and advocacy. Raksha works towards healing, empowerment, and justice for survivors of violence. We're always very honored to get to co-host events with Raksha, and so thank you to everybody from Raksha who is here tonight. We always appreciate your presence in the virtual events and also in the in-person events. I want to encourage folks, if you have questions, please ask them as early as they occur to you. You don't have to wait. That's the benefit of the online platform. Just, take your time. And I know we already have one question, which is wonderful. But we want to give space to answer as many questions as possible. So get them in. You can put them in the chat, or if you see the Q&A box on the right-hand side, you may put them there. But I'll make sure they're sorted, so don't worry too much about that. So I first want to introduce Dr. Marielle Bouquet, who is an Afro-Latina psychologist and CEO of Break the Cycle of Trauma, where her mission is to help reduce the recurrence of intergenerational ACEs, meaning adverse childhood experiences. She earned her doctoral degree in psychology at Columbia University, where she also trained as a holistic mental health fellow within Columbia University Irving Medical Center. In this role, she helped to build and implement an integrated system of care and specialty clinics across Columbia Medical, with a focus on helping Black and Latino community members overcome trauma and build better overall health. She continues to carry this mission into her consultation with health organizations and Fortune 500 companies. Dr. Bouquet is the author of the best-selling book and Karis bestseller as well, Break the Cycle: A Guide to Healing Intergenerational Trauma. So we're very glad to have you here as our interviewer and interlocutor. And the person of the hour tonight is Sahaj Kaur Kohli, who is the founder of Brown Girl Therapy, which is at Brown Girl Therapy everywhere, the first and largest mental health and wellness community organization for adult children of immigrants, a licensed therapist, and a columnist for the Washington Post advice column Ask Sahaj. Sahaj's words and work have been featured in Today, Good Morning America, CNN, The New York Times, HuffPost, and others. She also serves as a consultant, educator, and international speaker. She has sat on panels and delivered workshops and keynotes for the White House, Amazon, Google, Athena Health, Merck, JP Morgan Chase, LinkedIn, UNICEF, and many others. But the reason we're here tonight is to celebrate But What Will People Say? So put your hands together in the chat, say hello, and please welcome our author tonight. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, ER. We
Thank
appreciate
you.
it so much. And I'd love to echo ER's sentiments. Congratulations, Sahaj, on birthing this beautiful, beautiful book, this guide, this uh, way of being able to get through a lot of the humps that many of us have to unfortunately go through. So thank you for your labor in birthing this beautiful book that I'm so excited to talk to you about. Um,
Thank you. I'm so excited to be in conversation with you.
Likewise, likewise. It's such an honor to be able to be a part of this journey with you. So thank you for having me. Um, so I wanted to get us started with like a very kind of like overarching understanding of really kind of what brought you into wanting to explore the concept within this book. I mean, there's like I told you before, this book is thick, right? She is
Yes.
with so many gems. So there's a lot here, right? But why? But what will people say? Give us some context as to how you kind of landed at that. Help us understand that journey.
Yeah, I mean, I've always used writing as a tool for coping and for processing my own emotions and my own experiences, especially as someone who was young, right? I started journaling when I think my earliest journal was from sixth grade, and I still have all of them. And it was just a way for me when I didn't have access to maybe professional support or even relationships that I felt safe in to process my own experiences. And that led me to a career in journalism, which then led me into a career as a mental health professional. And the book kind of felt like something I knew I would always write, but I didn't know it would be this book. I didn't ever know what the book would be. And I think it was the culmination of all of my experiences, both personally as the first in my family to be born in the West, as someone who grew up in an environment, an Indian household that is diametrically opposed. It has values, norms, expectations that are opposing to the Western values, expectations, and norms that I was socialized in the American, culture. And I always felt like I wasn't enough. And fast forward, 3 decades, and when I was 30, and switching careers and married outside of my race, religion, culture, and had already experienced my own mental health issues, had sought therapy, had experienced depression, had experienced something really traumatic I needed professional support for. It all came together for me where I was like, how come I feel so alone in my thoughts, in my feelings, in my experiences as someone who's an Indian woman? Why does it feel like I'm not enough or I'm too much? Or why is it that I'm like Googling things and seeking out self help content and I don't really feel like I'm being represented in the way that I need? Because there's only parts of me being represented, the Western kind of individualistic part of me, not the collectivist part or the Indian part. And so I think it was a culmination of all of these things that led me to start Brown Girl Therapy, which was kind of my foray into beginning this book without even realizing it, because so much of this book is what I do on Brown Girl Therapy, which is talk about how we can bridge between Western psychology and the needs of immigrant origin folks living in the West. And the title comes from, this really common saying that we have in South Asian households, which is, what will people say, where we worry about what other people are going to think about us because it's a collectivist culture. And it's actually something my own parents had said to me when I was going through my own mental health struggles, not because they didn't want to support me, but because they didn't know how. And they worried that because I was struggling, they failed me in some way. And so I think the title kind of reflects all of this, but also reflects my own fear of judgment from both of my cultures. As a bicultural person, I never feel American enough. I never feel Indian enough. I always feel like I'm totally strapped right in the middle between both of these cultures. And I really wanted that to be reflected in the cover and the faces and the different colors of the faces. And so, yeah, that's kind of how this book came to be. It's a book that I would have reached for as a younger version of myself. It's a book I know that I would have reached for now had I not written it. And it's something that I still even go back to for myself to say, what was the research I found on this one topic about, having a collectivist culture and setting boundaries or doing this work. And I do this work because it's meaningful to me as a community member. And then I use my story as an inroads to connect to other people.
Yeah. And it is, I will tell you, I wrote within my own book. It's something that my sister told me, which is, I was a little bit stuck in like writing the book as soon as I got to the first page. And she's like, just write the book you needed. Mm-hmm. And I remember writing that book, right? And then when I came across, but what will people say? There were aspects that were captured within your writing that gave me chills. And it would be the book that I would literally pick up and companion with for my own journey. And part of the reason why is because you, I think, captured the ways in which within our collectivistic cultures, we are also framed to want to connect, right? And I think that there is a lot that's happening in the ethos of the earth right now that is very disconnecting, which is why we're in this loneliness epidemic. But you're bringing in the older generations and bringing in their love and their wisdom and bringing in your own ways in which you've cemented your bicultural identity, and you're kind of interspersing all of these different moving pieces to make the connection work. And that just gave me chills when I was reading. And it was just so beautiful. So maybe help us understand, what it was like for you, and perhaps even how important it may have been for you to bring in your family into the mix of this book, and the stories that are held in your family as a way to also help people heal?
First, I want to say I do think our books work so well together. I mean, your book is phenomenal, and I think so much of what we do complements each other and also adds to the conversation for each other. And so, just kind of a everyone here buy her book because it's a great one. But I think it's a good question because I get asked a lot. There are so many amazing books written by experts and people who have been doing research and professionals, and I use those words kind of with quotes because what does it mean to be those things? But there are so many books written by people who have a certain level of power in their fields, where they're able to share maybe and disperse some of the advice and the research they've done, and those are such important books. And there are so many amazing books written by memoirists who are able to share their stories so vulnerably and openly. And those are also such phenomenal books. And I knew deep down that I wanted to merge those two things. I wanted to not only talk at people as someone who has done research on this community for 5 years, but I also wanted to show up as someone who lives within these struggles too, who can relate, who is a part of the community first before I'm someone who started studying the community. And I really wanted that to come through in my work. And I think for me, it was really hard to decide to be so vulnerable in this book. I share so much about my life and experiences that I have held so much shame about and so much fear of what people might think when they read it and how they might judge me differently or see me differently. But ultimately, my why was always I want to show people the power of vulnerable storytelling, that we can heal each other, we can heal ourselves through actually showing up honestly about who we are. And that's the fear we have. That's the disconnection we have, is we're often always scared that people won't show up for us, that if we reach out, they won't be there, that we're not enough, that we're not lovable, that we're not worthy. And I have felt these things deep to my own core. I have felt so lonely in my own body, in my own world, in my own relationships. And a part of me sharing this book was to say, I've worked really hard to reconnect with my loved ones. I didn't always have a healthy relationship with my family members, with my siblings, with my parents. And I know there are people out there who read my work and say, oh, it looks like you and your family are so close. You can't possibly relate to what I've been through. And it's not that I'm expected to relate to everything, but it's more of me saying, no, I get it. I've struggled too. And I have done so much work to bridge some of those generational divides, bridge some of those cultural divides. And I want the book to be, I want it to be a beacon of hope. Ultimately, I want it to be something that someone reads from start to finish and says, wow, going from the beginning of your relationship with your parents to how it is now is so different. And this is what I've done to get there. And here's what's worked for me. And it may or may not work for you, but here's also a bunch of other tools and research and things that you can take into your life. I want it to serve as a mirror where I can say, hey, I'm not just saying what you should do, I'm showing you what I've done. And I want you to take what works for you and leave what doesn't. I want you to have agency over your life to say, this is actually how I want to do it. Because that's what I was missing in a lot of the content I was seeking growing up, was kind of the agency to say, oh, I want you to choose what is best for you and your relationships. And so using my personal story just felt really important because I wanted to meet people where they were. And in essence, by being vulnerable, I wanted to remind people to be vulnerable too, that this is the power of the book, is for us to connect in a really raw and honest way with every single part of ourselves, even the ones that we hide.
Yes, absolutely. It's almost like, offering some version of a permission slip, which, the way that the mind works, the mind is fascinating, as I know, we all know, right? But it sometimes needs a very like verbal and visual confirmation that we have options, that we have agency, right? That we need to be affirmed, even if it's through text. Sometimes it's through people that love upon us. Sometimes it's through music, right? Like, but we need that confirmation to say, you can do this. It's a very hard thing to do, to extract yourself, and figure out what you need and then reintegrate. That's really hard. And sometimes, like you said, we may have a bit of tension. Sometimes even destruction can arise within our family units. So sometimes it's a healthy destruction. It's a destruction of the things that were not really functioning and needed to be reconfigured. And we need that permission slip to say, I can do this. And, I have the power in me to do it.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And I think and I know that's a lot of what your book does. And I hope that my book adds to that conversation of destroying almost the things that haven't been working and being the ones who are courageous enough to kind of move the momentum forward for our families, because that healing isn't just for us, right? Once you start working on healing yourself, on growing yourself, it permeates into all of your relationships. It heals those before you, those after you, those with you on this journey. And I think that's a part of what I want this book to be. I want it to be so loved and passed around and highlighted and quoted and shared with loved ones in order to build those bridges that I know so many of us are aching for, because we're kind of living on our own islands. And a part of that is also finding the bricks for the bridges that are actually healthy and foundational and will work for our relationships. It's not about just staying in relationships that don't feel good. It's not about just maintaining dynamics that aren't working for us. It's about really interrogating our role and also our relationships and our cultures and our values and our norms and all of these things. That's what I want this book to be. I want it to be more questions than answers, because I want it to give you the questions for you to ask in your own life and in your own relationships.
Beautiful. Yeah. I remember the moments within the book when your father apologized to you for the first time. And it actually brought me to a moment where my mother apologized to my sister for the first time. And I was there as the intermediary, just like kind of like, navigating it with them. And in that moment, I thought, because everybody has the same goal, everybody wants to feel each other's love. Everybody wants to be in union together and harmony together. We were able to arrive, right? But there were a lot of clashes before that. It's really hard to navigate the kinds of values that get translated from one land to another, and maintain, relationships with family members who are very keen on maintaining values that don't translate in the same way. And I know that there's a lot of people, and I know that we've also received like one question that alludes to this, to the fact that we have these ways in which we need to negotiate the values that have been there, while still trying to maintain some sort of a relationship, while still trying to uphold some sort of boundaries. That's a really tough terrain, and I know you kind of like help us very beautifully navigate that very complex interchange. Can you tell us a little bit about, what we can expect in the book, about what might happen as we're navigating cultural identities together with also like holding onto the boundaries that we need to hold to keep ourselves well?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to sugarcoat it. The work is hard. It's painful, it's difficult, it's ongoing. It's not something where you do one thing and then you all of a sudden arrive to this destination, right? Even though my dad has apologized to me for some of the things he's done when I was a child, which was beautiful and amazing and so much more than I could have ever expected growing up, for us to reach a point where we could have a candid conversation and he would apologize. But that doesn't mean our relationship is perfect. And that's okay, because it's always ongoing. And that's what it means to kind of be a cultural translator, to culturally negotiate constantly in your relationships and within yourself of what it means to show up honestly in these relationships. And I think a lot of what you'll find in the book and the process of doing this work and the process that I had to go through was that it's not easy, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't try. And I think that that's a lot of the fear I get from people within the brown girl therapy community is I'm scared. I'm scared to have these hard conversations. I'm scared to be honest about what I feel or how I practice my religion or who I want to marry or the career I want to pursue, because we are all scared. We're scared to disappoint our parents. We're scared to feel like maybe their love will be taken away from us. We're scared to admit what is true to us. We're scared to admit to ourselves maybe a role that we play in our own dynamics, right? There's a lot of fear that comes up. And so a lot of times this work really involves us interrogating those fears, interrogating what our loved ones are afraid of as much as we interrogate what we're afraid afraid of. And oftentimes it really is just wanting to be loved and connected with each other, with our cultures, with our roots, with our identities, because that's what I often see is happening between immigrants and their children, is that the foundational fears for immigrants are often around cultural erasure, right? A fear of a lack of security, a lack of stability, a lack of, being appreciated, all of these things that come out because maybe they don't have the language to say, hi, I'm scared about this, but they might say, don't do that, or they might coerce control, or they might try to come off as overbearing. But what they really mean is, I'm terrified. This is new for me too, and I don't know how to handle it. And so often the work I've had to do is learn some of the tools in my own therapy over the years, and then bring those tools back into my relationship with my parents. I can't expect them to be at the same emotional journey or at the same point on the path as I am, because I've had access to resources and opportunities in ways that they haven't. And I find that for me, and this may not be the case for everyone, and that's okay, is that I'm okay with the fact that my role sometimes is to do some more of the work for us to have a healthy relationship. That it sometimes is my job to kind of meet them closer to where they are than expect them to meet me where I am, because I also have to have a realistic expectations of what I can expect from them. Mm-hmm. And so when you're reading through this book, a lot of the work is getting clear on your values. How does it differ or relate to the people that you hold close to you? How are your values and the beliefs tied to those values different from your parents? How does that show up in your relationship? A lot of this book will walk you through how to navigate the guilt that comes up. Guilt is the biggest theme that comes up in my work with children of immigrants. Guilt for being too much, for not being enough, for doing something wrong, for disappointing, for all of these things. And sometimes we have to question that guilt. Is it actually telling you that you're doing something wrong? Or is it just, do you feel guilty because you're disappointing someone and that just feels bad, right? We have to interrogate what that guilt is trying to tell us. We have to understand and lean into pride instead of shame. So much of my life before, maybe the age of 25, if I'm being honest, was I carried so much shame about my experiences. And it was only in the last decade that I've been able to really towards that shame, not hide away from it, and start leaning into pride and acceptance and self-compassion of who I am, what I did or didn't know, what I've experienced, and how I can lean into pride of my own bicultural identity instead of feeling like I'm not enough. And a lot of what I want to kind of walk people through is, how do we do that for ourselves? How do we start to get to know ourselves? Because so many of us have been told who we're supposed to be, rather than even have the opportunity to explore who we want to be. And I want this book to kind of give, like you said, that permission to people to say, this is what I want. This is who I am. These are what my needs are, before they even try to bring them into their relationships. Mm-hmm. And I hope that my book can offer that to people, those tools along the way, no matter where you are in your journey, whether you've had the same conversation 100 times with your parents, or you're trying to broach the first conversation and you're terrified to do so. I really want this book to be able to be accessible for everyone, regardless of where they are on that journey.
And it sends a clear message of, these hard conversations are not only survivable, but they can actually feel rewarding on the other side. You go through the process of everything that's encompassed. There's grief, there's the feelings of loss, there's depression, there's anxiety, right? There's all those things. And then there's also something else, and that we can look forward to, even if it's a microscopic little tiny mm-hmm. little gift of what can come out of it. We hold on to that.
Yes. I mean, people are waiting for, the whole pie to be baked, when I'm often just breadcrumbs are enough right now. Progress is progress. And sometimes baby steps are still getting us in the direction we want to go. You don't have to take leaps forward, right, with your loved ones. Sometimes it is about just doing something different, trying something new. Nothing changes if nothing changes. I mean, I think I start a chapter with that sentence because it's so true. Nothing will change unless you are willing to maybe do something a little different. Try to have a hard conversation, broach a conversation, a topic in a new way, right? Have the conversation, and so if you're always fighting over text, do it over a phone call or in person. Just finding different ways and new perspectives and new angles that you can kind of come at the same thing is a lot of the work that I do with my clients, because often they just feel well, I've tried and I'm stuck and now this is just how it is. And our work is often, well, how can we find, a new pathway, how can we create a new pathway towards the destination that you want to go? Because it's so easy to feel there's no way out of the situation you're in. But that's not true. And I have felt like that. I have felt that multiple times in my life. And I really, that's a part of the reason why I chose to share my story so vulnerably, because I really want to take people on that journey and help them through it.
Yeah, yeah. It's a beautiful gift because it's, it's birthed out of experiential knowledge, like knowing what this is like, knowing the hard, moments that come up in the journey, and like you
Mhm.
said, not sugarcoating, but instead being, having almost kind of like a real conversation about what to expect. I do want to kind of touch on the fact that there is a lot of compassion that is held in these pages too. Compassion for a lot of the people that walk the journey with you, compassion for anybody who will be walking the journey with any reader, right? I think that that's an essential element of what we can find here, because there is a lot that our families are also losing in the process of also obtaining their own version of bicultural identities, right?
Mhm.
They're holding on to those cultural values because sometimes that's all they have to hold on to. They've lost just about everything else. So it's a moment where we can hold so much compassion and love for them in that, while also honoring, how maybe some of the values that they're holding on to, or the ways that they have behaved as a result, isn't necessarily healthy or helpful. Um, yeah. Well, with that,
Yeah.
yeah, please.
No, I mean, I think you're totally right, and that's it's such a delicate balance, because I often get asked a lot of questions around, how do I balance this with this, and figure out how to honor my parents' values while also being true to myself. And these are all really valid questions, and unfortunately, there isn't a solution, right? It's not, there's no one singular miraculous thing that I can say that will all of a sudden solve all of our problems, because that experience feels and looks so different to so many of us. And research even suggests that immigrant families are more likely to be enmeshed or not have boundaries, because it's actually a protective and adaptive feature for them. When they come to this country, they become insular with themselves as families, but also as communities, because they're protecting. It's almost like mama bears protecting their like cubs. They want to protect us from harm from the dominant society. They want to protect themselves from harm from the dominant society. So they just become really enmeshed. There's no boundaries. And yes, that can it can evolve into harm for us as people who live in those family systems. And sometimes even just knowing where it comes from can give us just a little bit more compassion to say, okay, maybe I shouldn't get so defensive. How can I actually broach this conversation so they can understand it, so we can actually talk about it without me just feeling like they're suffocating me, or they're not understanding, or they're not giving me my space, or they're not letting me make decisions for myself. And I think that that is what has helped me a lot. And that's the work I've done with this book, is to say, I do have a lot of compassion for my parents. I dealt with childhood trauma. My parents have, done and said and treated me in ways that were really harmful. And I know that they loved me like so fiercely and with so much love. And I can hold both of those things true at the same time.
Yeah.
I don't have to pick one or the other. I don't have to rationalize one or the other. I don't have to justify one or the other. I can just hold both of those things and move forward with both of those things being true. And it's that discomfort that is really hard for people. The discomfort of not having like a clear package or understanding of our experiences, and instead saying, we're existing in this middle gray area where many of us are the first in our families to actually be bicultural, to grow up in a new country with different cultural values, norms, and expectations. Our acculturation journeys are so different from one another. And it's not black or white. It's not right or wrong. It's not good or bad. It's not yes or no, right? It's very different for all of us. And so, as you were talking about boundaries, I feel like that came up because boundaries in general, enmeshment, it comes up a lot in my work. And that fear is so real. The fear our parents carry, it doesn't justify or absolve them of any harm they might have caused us, but it's very real. And all of that can be true at the same time.
Absolutely. And you touched a little bit on, the ways that you kind of like get at certain questions or get at certain like points in order to help a person to navigate the difficult conversations themselves. But I know that there is, first of all, like the chapter titles like hooked me right away. So I want to highlight at least one that that I'm going to ask a question from, which is the chapter. Uh, this is the chapter section that is called "Tips for Talking to Immigrant Parents About Mental Health." And I was like, absolutely, we all need it. Let's go, right? So within there, you highlight the ways in which a person can talk to immigrant parents, their immigrant parents, through an explanation of the ways in which their own functional impairment is actually what's being impacted by whatever the life circumstance. And it help us understand what you mean by that functional impairment. How is it that a person might approach the conversation? What's the language that they would use versus what's the language that they wouldn't use?
Yeah, that's it. I mean, that section was so important for me to write because those conversations don't look the same for us as maybe what we're being advised in Western conversations around talking about mental health, where in Western, wellness conversations, it's often like, how to talk about depression and how to help someone who has depression, but it's never like, it's so nuanced to Google something that's like, how do I talk to my parents who are Indian and have collectivist values and have never heard of the word mental health about mental health, right? Where do we get that information? And so that whole section is to try to help people have that language and that tool to be able to have these conversations. And a lot of it is around using accessible language, right? And saying I'm depressed, saying I'm anxious, that doesn't mean anything to my parents because they don't really understand what that means because they've also never really understood that maybe they've experienced those things because they were never taught what those things are. It feels like something to many of us that's for white people or for Western people, for people who don't look like us, because why are we stressed? Why are we anxious? Why are we depressed? Especially if you are a child of an immigrant who might have experienced something quote unquote worse, or they had hard lives, or they experienced suffering in some way. It can be easy to say, well, you had it so much easier. We sacrificed so much for you. And so you might talk yourself out of what you're feeling. It's almost like a mental health imposter syndrome where you feel like I can't be struggling because my parents had it worse. I can't be struggling because my family who lives in another country has it worse right now. So my struggles don't mean anything. And one of the biggest ways to bridge those conversations and for us to validate maybe that we're struggling is to focus on executive functioning and functional impairment. And so what I mean by that is to focus on your sleep, your work, your relationships, your day-to-day functioning of feeding yourself, brushing your hair, taking a shower, all of these things that you do just to survive, and how that's actually being impacted by maybe the mental health struggle you're experiencing right now. And that's something I found in my own conversations with my parents to say, I am feeling so overwhelmed that it is hard for me to sleep at night. I am so stressed with work that it is hard for me to focus on the homework assignment I have now, and to focus to really make it so specific to the everyday functioning, but in a way that they can understand. And so a lot of immigrant parents again focus on stability, security, work, career. How are you taking care of yourself so you can be better at your job or be a better kid or whatever it is, and bringing it into that and focusing on those things rather than just using language like I'm depressed, you should understand I'm depressed, and that's on you. Whereas maybe it's about us using language that they can understand, because for better or worse, they don't have access to that language. And so I think it's really important for many of us to really think about that. What is the language we can use? And even if there's a language barrier, I get so many questions from people. I don't actually speak the same language, or my parents aren't proficient in English. And so how can I talk to them about this? And to that, I often say, how can you find something that can give you an inroad into these conversations? That might be watching a movie, right, in a language that they understand, but has a mental health theme, or reading a book together, or listening to a podcast, or listening to a song, or a celebrity interview. There are so many Bollywood actors who now talk about mental health openly. And if I was in the beginning of my stages of talking about mental health with my parents, I might actually watch one of those interviews with them and say, oh my gosh, this person is talking about mental health. Like, what do we think about this? So instead of making it just about us and making it feel like this bigger conversation, just finding these inroads to even talk about the topic at all can allow us to then have an inroad to broach these really difficult conversations and use language that they understand, make it feel relatable and normalized to them. And oftentimes that might also look like reflecting it back onto them. So if your dad comes home from work and seems like his back is hurting, he's like stretching his neck, you can say, you must have had a really hard day at work. And he might say, no, what does that mean? Like, because he doesn't talk about his feelings, but even normalizing that, reflecting their feelings, validating it for them. Those are all ways for you to use language and make it really relatable for them. Even if it doesn't feel like you're making progress with it, I guarantee you it's still something that's going to stick with them, and it's an ongoing conversation where the more you say it, the more they'll start to normalize, like, oh, when I come home and my neck hurts, maybe I'm actually stressed out, or maybe I'm taking on too much work. And it's not the direct conversations, it's not the explicit language. Sometimes that's the thing that doesn't work for us, that we're told to do in Western like tips around talking about mental health.
Mm-hmm. Oh my goodness, yes. I love that you are not keeping it in one generation, and there is a bilateral, like ways in which the conversation is happening from one generation to the next and then back. Because yet again, it can be very easy to say, we're just going to leave the old generation back there. And we're like, not going to, like help them with the micro tools that we could help them with. And it can be, for some of us, especially those of us that can look at our family members, particularly the older generations, and look at them and say, like, I wish you had it easier. I wish you had a tool. I wish you had, someone to kind of like reach out before me, right? We can offer just a little tiny piece of that respite. And that's something that can happen in the context of this conversation. It's beautiful.
Yeah, compassion and curiosity. Curiosity goes a long way. I mean, that's a tool that I try to teach everyone, even in my own families. Like, it's easy to get defensive, to feel like take something personally, to feel like you're not being heard. And those are all valid. And oftentimes it's about being curious. What did you mean by that? What are you afraid of? What are you worried might happen? Asking these questions allows people to really then face their own fears, to face what it is they meant, to take accountability for their own thoughts and feelings, and what they're saying in the conversation with you. Curiosity goes such a long way, and it can build so much compassion and help you have and manage your expectations you have of the people around you, because when you start asking questions, you get clarity on where they're coming from, where they are on their own journeys, what they may mean by things, the fears that are holding them back, the expectations they might have. And it allows you to then broach those things and to bridge, kind of build a bridge between the two of you, essentially.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah. Now, we kind of talked about parents a lot in the context of like people that are a generation removed, right? But I'm wondering from the perspective of individuals that are parents, let's say new parents, parents to toddlers, maybe parents to like preteens, like individuals that are now engaging in their parenting journey and having to then do the negotiation and the reconciliation of what is the value system, or what are the set of like ideas, cultural ideas that I am translating forward versus not. How might this book help that population, the individuals who are immigrant parents in the now trying to figure it out? How might the book, kind of like help them navigate?
That's such a good question. This book is for everyone. First of all, everyone knows someone who, I would bet everyone who lives in a city, depending on where you are geographically, probably works with, knows, loves someone who straddles more than one culture. And so just for that reason, you should pick this book up so you can understand these people better. And then it's for the child of immigrant, right? The one who might feel like they're displaced between cultures, and how do they navigate these and bridge these relationships that are important to them. And then as a therapist, it's for my fellow clinicians who I want to be able to work better with this population who is so underserved in our own mental health community. And then it is for the immigrant parents. It is for the people who, may not have had access to these resources, but can now. And I get asked a lot, do you not care about immigrant parents because of the way that you talk about your own? And I'm like, that's not necessarily how I want my work to come off, because if you're getting defensive about how I may or may not be talking about a generation, that says something more about what we are holding true. That says more about the cultural values of the person who might be thinking that way than it does about what I wrote. And what I mean by that is that I've had these conversations with my own parents about what I put in this book. what I, thought was really important to talk about, why I felt like I needed to share that I struggled in college, right? Why would you share that way? Why is that even important? You're not in school anymore. Well, because I want to be honest about my journey and highlight that success and career and academics were so important to you. And I felt like I failed because I couldn't get there fast enough because I didn't do it conventionally. And I think even bridging these values and these norms is really important. And so when I think about an immigrant parent picking up this book, for me, it's not about activating what you didn't do or what you're not doing or what you haven't done yet. And instead it's about, again, curiosity of all the ways that we, each of us who picks this book up, me included, are still perpetuating dynamics that are not healthy for us. And I think when I think about an immigrant parent picking up this book, I want to remind anyone who feels activated by reading this book that I want you to sit with that. A lot of what happens when we feel activated and defensive is because it's bringing up something in us that still might be wounded, that might be healed. And a lot of that might also be from the ways that our immigrant parents, or you as an immigrant parent, if you're listening to this, has been parented. And that is something I have found. I'm not a parent yet, I'm an aunt, but even in my work with like thinking about this next generation, I have had to reparent myself and reparent my parents through the process of reparenting myself, because I have the tools to be able to say, oh, this is what I think is happening, or here is a part of you and an inner child version of you that still hasn't gotten the love they needed, or didn't get to laugh with your parents in the same ways I get to laugh with you, or didn't get to have access to their parents in the same ways I get access to you, And I think that is really hard for our parents, because many of our parents, mine, and I'll talk about mine, got married very young, really only thought about their kids. And now my parents are at retirement age, are not financially needed by their kids. And they're like, what does this mean for my life? And for me, it's, how do you enjoy yourself? How do you actually give yourself the things you didn't know that you would ever be able to have, which is joy and pickleball and games and travel and all of these things, laughter, ease, because you always were in survival mode. And what I want this book to do is I want it to offer that to immigrant parents. I want it to offer a new way to exist in your relationships with your children, but also for yourself, that it's okay for you to also let go a little bit and say, what about me? Because you might have spent your whole life thinking about your children. And I want that compassion that I give to my parents in my book to give that to any immigrant parent who picks up this book and can say, I also deserve to enjoy a little bit. I also deserve to think about myself. I also deserve to think about what's important to me. And so I think I rambled a little bit, because when I think about an immigrant parent picking up my book, I think it brings up a lot for me, because in writing this book, and I'll be honest here, I always worried about if I was contributing to a stereotype of my community by being honest about my own experiences. And I know that the purpose of writing this book wasn't to contribute to a stereotype of the immigrant community or the South Asian community. And I know that I had to be honest about my experiences in order to help people who also struggle with the same things, because it's cyclical. And so when I think about that, I think I sometimes get worried that someone will pick this up and say, we're not all the same. And that's true, because I'm one person who wrote this book, and I can't for the life of me speak to every single child of immigrant or immigrant parent who picks up this book. So that's my answer.
Yeah. You kind of tied into the last question that I had for you, which was about, kind of like the emotional labor of writing something like this, right? Because there is this pressure to ensure that you're encapsulating as many of the experiences that are captured in the immigrant and child of immigrant experiences, right? While also holding on to your own humanity and the limitations of your humanity, right? And so it's like,
so much. Yeah.
How did you hold that emotionally, or how are you holding it now that it's birthed into the world?
I don't know that I'll ever not be scared of how people perceive this book, but that's something that I also just have to accept, right? The book is a mirror. And if it is bringing up something in you that is unpleasant, it probably is less about what I wrote in the book, and it's probably more about what you're navigating in your own life. And I have to remind myself of that. We can hold up a mirror to anyone in our life, and we can't force them to look in it. That's how relationships work. It's not our job to force people to take accountability or to change or to control other people. But I think emotionally, this book was really hard because it forced me to interrogate so many of my own past experiences and even my own shortcomings, right? I wanted to have compassion for myself and my loved ones. And I wanted to be honest about the experiences I had because of my loved ones, and because I also made mistakes or did things maybe I wouldn't do now, or said things I wouldn't say now. And that's a part of being in relationships and being in community with other people, is being honest about ourselves while also being truthful about the experiences we're having and the impacts they're having on us. Mm-hmm. And so I carry all of these things at the same time as I was writing this book, and I carry it now, and I write about it in the introduction, right? I'm trying to ask people, please have this nuance. Please recognize that I'm trying my best to be honest about my experience while also recognizing I am a single person, and all of our experiences are going to be wildly different in so many innumerable ways. And that is just the truth. If we don't have the representation and we haven't had for so long, it can feel like one person is supposed to represent all of us. And that's just not how it works. And that's a systemic thing more than anything. But it also feels like a lot of pressure for me to feel like I am supposed to represent everyone, but I can't. And so emotionally, I've just had to accept that this is my story. This book is my truth. It is my truth. And I carried a lot of nuance when I decided what parts of my truth to share in this book. And that is just enough. And I hope it gets into the hands of people who really just need to hear what it is I had to say in this book.
I'm sure that it will. There's a beautiful way in which you've carried the nuance, while also helping us navigate ways in which we could personalize the strategies within the book. I do want to end with just some powerful words that you have ended us with here, where you tell us, remember, you are writing your family history right now. What cycle do you want to be responsible for? And I think that you leave us in so many places within the book with this moment of abundant reflection. And of course, the end, would also be that for us. But I just want to thank you for the labor of love that is to write something like this, that is just deeply, deeply invested in it. It really is captured in this book. And I want to honor the fact that we have some beautiful questions that I've been reading, that I want to make sure that we get answered, because people are eager to hear from you and with respect to a couple details. So I'll transition us to questions. And the first question, I won't read the entirety of the question, but I will read one aspect that I think will be helpful for us to at least unpack here, which is when we have ways in which our families are interfaith, or not necessarily like connecting about identities or different cultural nuances. How can we still experience a parent's blessings despite it?
Yes, I get asked this question a lot, and I do have an entire chapter about, me myself choosing to marry someone outside of race, religion, culture, first in my family to do so. And I think I try in that chapter to offer a lot of tips, while I also share my story about what it was like to have these really hard conversations with my parents about choosing this partner. And a lot of that work involved addressing their foundational fears, addressing the fact that at the end of the day, my mom thought I was making my life harder by choosing someone outside of my religion. And, my dad was really fearful of cultural erasure, and really addressing what those foundational fears was really important. I think when I get asked this question, generally too, about interfaith relationships, a lot of times what happens is people are like, I've been with this person for a long, long time, but I can't tell my parents until I'm 100% sure. And that's often a dynamic that so many of us feel that we have to prove that the choices we're making are the right choices. And to get to 100% in anything is very unrealistic. And so what I would always encourage people to do, instead of waiting until you feel that 100%, is to start having these smaller, hard, difficult, ongoing conversations with your parents. This could be things around your own choices that you're making, maybe about faith or religion, that are different from theirs. So it has nothing to do with the partner yet, but it has to do with getting them to know you and what is important to you and what you are or aren't valuing that is similar or not to them. It might even be having conversations around, your feelings of what they feel about your partner choice. So it's hard for me to know that you disapprove of this person and you haven't even met them. are you open to meeting them? So even, making it feel like there's not so much at stake, but you really care and want their buy-in into the choices that you're making. Even talking about your happiness with your partner. A lot of the work I had to do was around like, hey, I know you don't approve of this person, but I want to tell you a little bit about them. Or they're the reason why I even thought to get that raise at work, or they're the reason why, I've been doing this. I had my own family tell me, you seem calmer now. And I was able to say, I think it's because I'm with a partner who understands this, and this about me. And I was able to kind of show them why it was the right choice for me, why this person made me happy. And I think having difficult conversations around faith and partner choice, it brings up a lot. And what I really find is that loyalty to our family, it comes up a lot in my work, and it comes at a cost. And I really encourage people to explore those, like what those costs are. How do guilt and loyalty serve your relationship with your family? How do they maintain dynamics in your family? How do they cost you? In what ways do they cost you? And if you are with someone where you are in a serious relationship and you are hoping to take it to the next level and you don't know if your parents are going to get on board, oftentimes it really is a matter of having that conversation with that partner. What is the crossroads for each of you? What's really at stake? Is it that your parents won't support you, or is it that maybe they'll then ostracize you and not have a relationship with you anymore? What are you willing to tolerate? At what point would you know that you are willing to walk away from each other or be with each other at the cost of your family being supportive? Everyone has non-negotiables. And I think getting clear as partners on what those are for you each before you even think about bringing the families into the equation is really important. Because often I hear from children of immigrants who say, I'm going to get my parents on board, then I'll talk to my partner about all these things. And I often say, well, if you're in this relationship and choosing to take it to the next level where they become your family too, then you should have those conversations with them first before having them with your family. And so it's a lot there, but I think I do talk about a lot of this, and I get asked this a lot, and I work as an intercultural therapist, couples therapist. And I think it's something that comes up a lot in my work, but there isn't, as with anything, there isn't a miraculous singular answer I can give someone to say, here's what you should do, and here's how it's going to get better. Because the reality is every family system is different, and you're probably scared and they're probably scared. And broaching it with that fear in mind can be the first step, I think.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And now I have a few questions that touch on siblings in some way. So I'm just going to couple them. And folks are really hoping to gather, when there are male and identified and female identified siblings for whom there's different gender-based expectations. Would this book, kind of specifically help with the kind of traumas that can surface from that? And together with that, for individuals that are hoping to bring their siblings into an understanding of why their parents chose to parent a certain way when they themselves have already kind of like held on to the understanding in a different way, how can those conversations be had?
Yes, I do think that this book will help for sibling relationships. It doesn't focus primarily on sibling relationships, but you will get my relationship with my older brother and my older sister along the way. And it talks about family functioning and how families function, especially in collectivist families where there is a vertical social hierarchy, where there's a lot of gender and age-based delineation of our roles, right? Birth order matters, age matters, gender matters. All of these things kind of inform the ways that we show up in our relationships and in our families, and the expectations placed on us. And a lot of times that can lead to levels of resentment between siblings who feel like they were treated differently or unfairly, or expected to do things differently, or were given more freedom because of age or not. There's lots of things at play here that I do talk about in my book that I think will help people understand maybe their siblings, and also have language to then communicate their own experiences to their siblings in that way. I talk a lot in this book about gender, just on and off. I think almost every chapter has, gender. I try to always take a feminist lens in any of my work, where I think about the systems in which we live. And often that means our intersectional identities, including gender. And I try to broach that into every theme I talk about, because it is very different for many of us of how we will communicate because of how we've been taught for me, for example, as an Indian woman, how I'm allowed to communicate or how I'm expected to communicate. And that's very different from how I feel like maybe my brother was taught how to communicate. And so I do think this book will help with siblings. I think it's really important to also just point out, given these questions, that we are parented differently. You know, it's, you can have the same exact parents as your sibling and you will be parented differently, because it's also not just a matter of your age and your gender and your birth order, but it's also where your parents are in their own journey. My parents were new immigrants in America when I was born, and my older siblings, you know, had already lived in 2 countries with them before moving to America. And by the time that I was 10, my siblings were out of the house, and my parents, you know, my dad was a very different dad than they had. And we talk all the time about how we had very different parents because it was just different circumstantially for my parents as well. And so it might give you some compassion to think about where your parents are on their journeys, see them as people before parents, to understand how and why they may have been may have been treating you differently if that were the case.
Yeah, thank you for that. I do want to end us on a question that was significantly upvoted by folks, and so and it's one that I think, you know, carries a lot of weight. So, any advice on how to cope with the weight of being child of immigrants when your parents are deceased and you can't have these conversations?
There is so much grief in being a child of immigrants that we don't talk enough about. This disenfranchised grief, which is just the term for a grief that isn't really socially accepted or acknowledged in our dominant society. And that can be grief for just straddling multiple cultures and never feeling enough, or it can be a grief of not having access to these people who might have been the ones who are carrying your family stories, who you can no longer ask questions about their experiences, and you may have to accept that you will not have that information. And so in that chapter, actually, towards the end, I do have an exercise that I do with my own clients where, you know, I would encourage you to think about writing a letter to these people who are no longer around, and also thinking about the things that you might want to ask them or might have wanted to know from them. It won't give you the answers that you need, but can also give you space to externalize and get those questions and those feelings out of your body onto paper. I think it's important to also consider that there's something known as the continuing bonds theory, which is something I write about in my book, which is how do we maintain our relationship with our cultures, with our, you know, ancestors, with our deceased immigrant parents when they're no longer here. And that can look different for everyone. So I can't really give you advice, but I do write about this in the book, where it's how can you maintain that relationship with them, knowing that they're no longer here, knowing that you can't ask them these questions. How can they still be a part of your life? How can they still be something that you carry on with you? Just because they're no longer here doesn't mean that you don't have a relationship with them, or you don't care, or you don't want to carry them forward. And that looks different for everyone. It might be visiting a place, cooking a food, having a ritual, having something you do on the anniversary every year, whatever it is. And I think that the beauty in sometimes with connecting with our roots and the people who we don't have here is that you can make it as personal to you, and you never have to tell anyone else. It really is up to you to decide, what does it look like for me to process this grief and also maintain these connections that are important to me. And I think just remember that grief is ongoing. We don't learn, there's no closure when it comes to grief. Instead, we learn to live and build our lives around this grief. Sometimes it'll hit you like a wave and a tsunami one day, and then maybe you'll have 6 months where you don't really think about it, and you just want to honor it when it comes. When it comes, it's telling you to sit, to process, to feel it, and then that's how you can move through it.
Wonderful. Thank you for your thoughtfulness in answering these questions. I know we didn't get to one, but I think that the answer really is this is for all generations, I think, and really applicable. But what will people say? Please get this book and take your time with it, because it's a book that you do. It's a book that you really like take your time in personalizing and applying to your life. And Sahaj, I just want to thank you once again for this wonderful gift that you've given to the world. Thank you for giving this to us and allowing us to experience your world, but also allowing us to experience your genius. We're so grateful to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bouquet, for being my, conversation partner here. And, your book also, in compliment to mine, is incredible, as it is, not just in compliment to mine, but, I think our books work really well together. And I want to encourage everyone here to buy your book, because I wouldn't say that unless It's something I actually bring into my clinical room with my clients. And I'm so grateful for you and your work and this conversation. And for everyone who tuned in, thank you so much. I'm really happy that I was able to be here virtually to have a conversation for folks who I know can't make it to in-person events. So thank you.
Thank you all for joining us in ER. We're ready for you to wrap us up if you're thank you.
Yeah, thank you both so much. So I just dropped a link to buy Break the Cycle in the chat, so you can get Dr. Bouquet's book. And of course, you can click this teal button to buy But What Will People Say from Karis. It really does help us when you buy event books from us. So thank you for doing that. And thank you to our partners, Raksha, for being with us tonight. Once again, it really is wonderful to have such an important resource like Raksha in our community. So thank you to everyone who works at Raksha and all of the volunteers and everyone who is from Raksha's support network for being with us tonight. We know this book is going to be great for many people from the Raksha community. So thank you. We will, if there's people that you think should have been here tonight who would have really loved this and they just missed it, it'll be up on our YouTube channel in a couple days. So check that YouTube channel is just youtube.com/Karis Circle. So share this with siblings or friends or other people who need this, and maybe it can start some family conversations too. I hope so. So thank you both so much. Please stay safe and well, and until your next books, we'll see you. Take care.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.